Hello and welcome to this episode of the Social CMO Show brought to you by the Social Business School of socialstrategy.com. I'm your host, the social data girl, Shilpi Agarwal, and my guest today is the head of marketing of Greenhouse, which is a recruiting optimization platform. Please welcome Barbra Gago. Hey Barbara, welcome to the show.
Hi there, thank you for having me.
So Barbara, please tell us about Greenhouse and how is it different from the other recruiting platforms out there?
Sure. So as you mentioned, Greenhouse is a recruiting optimization platform. So we're actually built to make you competitive at recruiting. So legacy systems are more built for tracking and admin. Just a little bit of background, we were founded in 2012 and we're now in hyper growth phase. So from hiring to revenue, our real focus is on scaling and scaling quickly. I guess in terms of how we're different, I would say that, we have built-in KPIs, so the reporting is really easy to access in terms of how you're performing. So a head of talent can go to the senior leadership or the hiring managers and show them what they care about, but they also have all the performance metrics that they can track their team to, keep the engines running effectively. The other thing I would say is, we have workflow management and process automation built in. So for the recruiting team, Greenhouse makes it really easy to always know what you need to do next. So whether it's scheduling a candidate for an interview or sending a take-home test, rejecting them or making an offer, anytime you do something in Greenhouse, your next set of tasks are already created for you, so nothing ever slips through the cracks. And the recruiting team can really focus on making strategic decisions versus just project managing the process. And generally, the overall UX of the product is also kind of a big differentiator. Interviewers love using it because it's really easy. They get their link in their calendar invite when they have an interview. They know right away, what am I interviewing for? Where they have the candidate's resume, and then they also have a scorecard to submit feedback. So it's like super simple and easy for them to be engaged in the hiring process.
So what I'm hearing is that it's a complete recruiting solution as opposed to providing silos of one solution and using like multiple, like using Gmail, then using a calendar, then using different solutions. Yeah, so this is like one all-in-one platform.
That's right.
You track, recruit, manage. Okay, that's awesome. So Greenhouse helps in following some of the best practices in recruiting that companies usually know about but find it hard to follow through. Is that right?
That is right.
And how does Greenhouse do that?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's really around the ability to create a structured interview process. Like, as you know, in sales and marketing, the funnel is very clearly defined. So the reason that is because savvy sales and marketing leaders want to constantly iterate and improve on what they're doing to drive performance. So that's the way we think the recruiting process should be. Not only does having a clear, structured interview process make it easier to report on, but it also helps companies make better decisions about candidates. So now they're comparing apples to apples. They know everyone went through the same process. They were all asked the same questions. They were assessed for the same traits equally. So it's a lot more data-driven approach. And it also really creates an environment where your candidates have a much better experience because you know what the process is, so you can more effectively communicate to them what it is. And the feedback we get, and we also see it here as we're hiring, is that candidates really feel the difference between a company that has a structured recruiting process and a company that doesn't, and it leaves a lasting impact. They're more likely to be impressed if the process has gone through efficiently and they know what to expect next. And as we here in the Silicon Valley know it's really hard to attract and get great talent. So the more you can do even in the process, the better you'll be at impressing those type of candidates.
True. You just like you mentioned, in Silicon Valley, it's hard to find good talent. So that was my next question. So recruiting is all about marketing these days. It's all about getting in front of the right audience, making connection with them, and influencing them to be able to join your company. How does Greenhouse help in that?
So I think, there are a lot of tools out there that help on the recruitment marketing side. And, a lot of them are actually typical marketing platforms. So companies are using things like AdRoll and social media and pay-per-click, retargeting people that came to their career sites. So there's a lot of tools like that that can really sort of drive brand and drive awareness. I think where we actually have the biggest impact in terms of recruitment marketing is more on the analytics side. So if you think about demand gen, and we talked about this a minute ago with the pipeline or the funnel, we're really sophisticated with our models around the funnel. So we know if we need to, generate 1 million in pipeline, that means we need a certain amount of opportunities and we need a certain amount of MQLs, which ultimately means, we need X amount of leads at the top of the funnel. So in Greenhouse, we have what we call a sourcing quality report, and it's super easy. It is mind-boggling why we still don't have this on the marketing side and why it has to be so complicated to do attribution. But you can basically look across all of your jobs, and you can drill down by specific job, you can drill down by department, you can look by location, whatever it is, and you can see where all the sources where you're acquiring candidates from, but you can actually see which are the best sources. So typically you get data from most systems. You can get data around how many applicants you've gotten. So okay, I posted a job on LinkedIn, I got 20 applications. On Indeed, I got 40, maybe I got 10 referrals, but those metrics don't really tell you much, because at the end of the day, if none of those people got past your phone screen, then who cares if you got 20 or 40 or 50? So in Greenhouse, we make it really easy to get to the quality metric. So you can look at each source and not just see where you got the most candidates, but you can see through the pipeline, how far did they get in the interview process? So maybe you see that candidates that you're prospecting or candidates that are referrals are getting to onsite and getting hired, or LinkedIn gets to phone interview, and you can sort of decide what makes sense. But ultimately, it's that's what matters, not so much if you got X amount of applications. And then we do have a couple other tools like A/B testing, job ads, so you can put 2 different versions out and you can get metrics back around which one converts more. And then we also have some social media and sharing, similar to how Hootsuite does it. Like if you're an employee, you can share on your social networks different jobs that your company is hiring for.
Very interesting. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about Greenhouse. Now I want to talk to you about more about growth hacking. So your primary job for the brand is growth hacking, and you said Greenhouse is in the hyper growth stage right now. So you're doing all kinds of growth in terms of recruiting as well as, so, but everybody has like a top growth challenge. So what is your top growth goal and what is your top growth challenge right now? Is it brand awareness? Is it customer acquisition? Is it download?
I think customer acquisition is definitely the name of the game at this point. And on the flip side, it's equally hiring to support that growth. So not only hiring on the marketing side to build the momentum, and then on the sales side to close the deals, but then also on the customer success side to make sure that we're, in line to support all of those customers coming through. I think that's one of our growth challenges. The other is, because we're our early adopters are basically a lot of the fast growth startups like us that see the value in data-driven recruiting and also need help having a very structured process so that they can scale really quickly. So for us, it's going to be more around, how do we cross the chasm from all of those early adopters where the message that resonates really well with them is growth and growth quickly, to going upstream to mid-market or enterprise where they might be hiring 1,000 people, but it's not to grow at a rapid rate. It's just maintenance hiring.
I see. Interesting. So what kind of growth strategies have you put in place for customer acquisition?
So going back to sort of what I mentioned about building the team, I think it's not a typical growth hack, but I think our hiring strategy is one of our key growth hacks, because we were extremely deliberate about growing the sales and marketing team in a way that mapped to the funnel. so that we could ensure short-term growth that we needed right now, but also building the foundation for long-term sort of inbound model. So I was brought on really early to start like establishing the marketing function before we had a head of sales, which gave us the opportunity to really get the messaging, talk to customers, understand the value proposition, get the sales tools right, and then build pipeline so that when we did scale up the sales team, they had stuff to close and not spend all of their time prospecting. On the marketing side, we made 4 key hires. We hired for inbound and content to focus on top of funnel, so doing social media, blogging, community. We hired a campaign manager to drive mid-funnel programs, so lead nurturing, really focused on building qualified leads, pay-per-click, directories, paid things that dropped people more into the mid-funnel. And then product marketing to support the sales funnel, and actually customer marketing to cover the customer funnel. So our team is really closely aligned with the customer life cycle. So how are we turning prospects into customers, and then customers into evangelists? So that's kind of one, maybe unexpected, but I feel like it's definitely a growth hack that we've taken. The second would be, for us, activating customers has been critical to our growth strategy. So this is something we started really early on, and something that we'll continue to focus on, bringing on a customer marketing manager, focusing on advocacy programs, building community. We sort of see the customer funnel as a mirror to the demand gen funnel. So once people become customers, we have a huge opportunity to nurture them, make sure they're successful on the product, do everything we can to create, happy customers that are evangelists that then drive people to the top of the funnel. One very tactical thing we did there was we would get great emails from customers saying we really love your product, you guys are awesome, thank you so much for your help, blah, blah, blah. Just good, we would get good emails. And so we took that as an opportunity to basically get them to do stuff for us at that point. So we created a very simple chart with 5 things that we wanted customers to do. Maybe it was tweet something, maybe we wanted them to write a review, maybe they did a case study, maybe it was to make an introduction for us. So when we would get those positive emails, the customer success person who would get it, or whoever got it, had this little chart next to them, and they could decide based on the type of compliment we got, how much, how much we were going to ask them to do. And we even provided email templates so they could just copy and paste and send it off. So that was a really good way that we could sort of build the momentum, online and through social media, leveraging our customers.
Cool. So you said 2 things that you've done. Out of those 2, is one working more than the other, or you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually, so I think out of all of them, activating our customers is by far the most effective, because at the end of the day, the happier your customers are, the more engaged they are with the product, the more successful we're going to be, no matter what. I think one other thing that we tried that's actually had a big impact too, which I'll just talk about for a second because it's interesting, is our vertical strategy. So a lot of times, when you look at go-to-market and the vertical, you go through a big persona process and you figure out the market fit for new industries and all of these things. We took a little bit of a different approach at this point where we're at now. And we basically looked at all of the customers that we've sold to, and we sort of analyzed all of the different verticals, and we saw that, we basically looked at the verticals that maybe we had a bigger deal sizes in, but that didn't have a lot of friction. So basically it wouldn't take us much to get in there. We wouldn't have to go rewrite all the positioning. We would just have to sort of pivot the context a little bit. So as an example, creative agencies, we actually had a number of customers in that bucket, and we found that if we just change how we talk about it, the problems are very similar. So they're not necessarily looking at hyper growth, but they hire a lot, and it's really competitive because they're looking for the best creative director or the best web developer, and it's very competitive, especially in markets like New York. So we were able to say, instead of it's really hard to hire an engineer, we know you're paying, here's how you can do it. We could say, you know, we know you're having challenges hiring creative directors, and these 3 customers did too. This is what they did. So it was like a really easy way to go after and be very targeted about kind of broadening our vertical reach without having like product implications or really having to change much of what we were doing.
So this change you did inside the software, or is it like the messaging around it? Like in campaigns and
just like
advertising?
tweaking messaging so that contextually it made sense, and maybe using logos that were all agencies instead of, you know, some of our tech companies. And then, you know, we would just take content that we've already done, tweak it a little bit, put new images, and it was a really good way to like not have to reinvent the wheel. But it only works for verticals that we knew, like we wouldn't be able to do that in financial because they have a lot more regulations and there's a lot more product implications. But because these verticals didn't really have, there wasn't any different product requirements, we could just kind of tweak the messaging a little bit, and it stretched what we were doing a lot farther, and we could be a lot more targeted with going after those companies.
So great point. But you can only turn customers into brand advocates once you have that ball rolling. So what did you do to get your first 100 customers and get this ball into motion?
So I think what we did was, I mean, we did get customers involved really early. We had 2 customer success people before we had any sales reps. So this is like built into the fabric of the organization. When we had 20 customers, you know, 5 of them were actually helping us out in terms of advocacy.
Right.
But we also did a lot of community events. So we did like small meetup type events where we would bring customers together, we would bring industry leaders together, we would do roundtable discussions, talk about challenges around growth and scaling. This fueled a lot of word of mouth for us, and it actually still does. We created a meetup in January that has over 600 members in the Bay Area. So just the community aspect is very deeply sort of rooted just in our approach all around, I think. And another thing that we did along those lines was, which really helped us a lot, was aligning with VCs. So we would go to some of the prominent VCs where we had customers that were funded by them and would say, hey, look at what your portfolio company did by using Greenhouse. They did X, Y, and Z. Maybe here's 2 other examples, and they would be so impressed that they would then tell all of their portfolio companies, hey, look at what this company did, and they're using Greenhouse. So that definitely helped spark the fire.
So you have some big brand clients like Pinterest and Airbnb, Uber. How did you manage to close those accounts?
I mean, I think for them, it's really like, a lot of the feedback we get is that, wow, this platform is designed by people who really get the recruiting process. They understand what we're going through. And I think, you know, a lot of those companies have used every other product that's out there and they've switched to us. But, you know, that's because they haven't found the right solution. So I think one is that it's built in a way that, you know, we do get it because we built it for best practice hiring process in mind, not, you know, tracking applicants and that's it. The other thing is these are companies that are also extremely disruptive. They're innovative. They're driven by technology. They're following all the technology best practices in terms of iteration, pivoting, you know, DevOps, all of these things. So we kind of mirror what they do across their entire organization. So why wouldn't they want their recruiting function and their people function, which is, you know, really the most strategic aspect of the organization in terms of driving the business forward, to also, you know, have the same level of principles and ability to sort of move at that rate and have all the data and performance metrics. So, I mean, I think it really just comes down to that.
Awesome. So how does social fit in?
So, I mean, I think for us, there's a few things. One, I mean,
so there are 2 parts to this question. One is social fitting into your growth hacking strategy, and the other is social built in as a marketing tool within your platform.
Okay, so for us on the marketing side, I think there's a few things. One is obviously customer engagement. So when we think about our customers, we want to support their growth, obviously, because the more growth they have, the more successful we are, because we're tied to their growth from that perspective. So anytime they're, getting funding or they post jobs, like, we're very active in supporting them and sharing their things and their accomplishments. I think it's been really effective for us in terms of targeting. So if we're doing one of those vertical strategies, if we're working with our SDR team to target a certain audience, LinkedIn and Twitter, you can get pretty granular on who you're targeting. So it's a good way for us to sort of target across channel and be very, very focused about who we're approaching with different campaigns. We did that for our vertical strategy. We've done it for different, like, maybe if we want to target, executives or founders, we could do that on LinkedIn and also Twitter and sort of across the channels. And then we also, use it as a learning tool. So obviously it also serves the purpose, like for most companies, in terms of, sharing blog content and driving conversation around events and that kind of thing. But we really use it as a learning tool to get insights around what the industry is doing and what are, what's the sort of groundswell around recruiting and stuff that's changing.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. I thought you finished.
I was just going to say, on the product side, it's really used as a tool to help everybody at the organization get involved in recruiting. That's one of, like, our core principles, is that, if you're going to be a company that's really effective at hiring and recruiting, the whole company has a stake in it and everybody's going to be involved. So this is a way for everybody to they can have their own tracking links, so they get credit. If they do make a referral, they can post it on their social media profiles and they can schedule things so that it's like, they don't have to think about it too much.
I see. That makes sense. So what about social advertising or paid advertising in general? So how much do you depend on your strategy, marketing growth hacking strategy depends on organic versus paid?
So I would say that for us, and I think a lot of earlier stage companies, it's basically like, we have the expectation, we know, well, let me take a step back. Like, we thought very sort of scientifically about customer acquisition. And in the beginning, we just tested a bunch of things because we wanted to get a good gauge of, what's the volume of leads we can expect? What's the quality of leads we can expect? What will conversion rates look like? We knew things like social media, blogging, thought leadership, building tools and resources would be good to support longer term goals, because that's kind of establishing the foundation. Exactly. So, but in order to grow rapidly, it's like you have to supplement that in the short term. And that's where paid comes in for us. So we do paid programs like pay-per-click. We actually found directories to be extremely effective for us. And I think the good thing about directories, especially for startups, is that they're like a company like Software Advice or Capterra, they're aggressively marketing their platforms for keywords, for tool sets that they have in their directory. So like applicant tracking or recruiting software, they're aggressively targeting those keywords. So if you don't have the budget yet to do that, just being on the directory and optimizing your presence there is actually a really good way to get that exposure, because they often show up very high in the search engine. So when people are searching for those things, they click and then they see you. So it's kind of like a little trick, but we found them to be really
called riding on someone else's wave.
Exactly. But we found them to be effective because, people are looking for solutions at that point. So it's a really good way to sort of supplement like mid-funnel demand and not have to wait too long to like nurture and do all of that qualification before you have qualified leads to send to sales.
This is great. This is awesome. So last question, one key takeaway, what would you say to somebody who is starting out with a new startup and trying out different, like you said, agile marketing, different strategies, quickly sifting through what works, what doesn't work, what conversion rates should look like, what lead gen should look like, where should they start, what should they do? one key advice that you have learned along the way?
One.
Yeah. Or maybe
That's
a process. What process would you say they should start with, and then the first step, the second step, and the third step, just like a.
I mean, if you're really starting from scratch, I think the most important thing is to get a marketing leader that is very hands-on, that has experience with all this stuff, but at a senior enough level that can think about it from a strategic perspective. So it's like getting someone who's really young or new to marketing or just a few years will be helpful to like execute, but you won't really be able to be executing on the right things. Like you need somebody who can think about what the strategy is and how executing in parallel to that strategy versus just execution. So I think that's really important. And then, you know, it's always starting with the sales tools, because at that stage, it's like get the sales team what they need to be able to sell and position the product, and then take a step back and start working on the inbound stuff. The inbound takes the longest to really build momentum, but ultimately it has the best return because you can, you know, turn down how much money you're spending. But I think setting the expectation that you're going to have to spend some money up front to get the pipeline going. But if you also in parallel work on the inbound, at a certain point it kind of crosses and you can, you know, turn down the paid programs.
So what kind of budget is a good amount to get started with?
I mean, it really depends on how much. I think in my experience, it really depends on how much the leadership team believes that marketing will be effective, and if you have the right person. Because if they believe it'll be effective, you know, you could have, I mean, for a startup, even $10,000 a month is going to make an impact. And, you know, at that stage, it's like a toss up because you want to learn fast. So it's like, if you spend a little more money up front, just like when you start a pay-per-click program, they always say like, okay, well, you need to put a lot more money up front because you need to sort of establish, you know, your understanding of it. So, you know, I've had a lot of success with as little as $5,000 in a month. You know, or $5,000.
Click versus Facebook versus Twitter, any other form of paid advertising. What's your experience? What has worked well?
I think content syndication is actually a really good way to, you know, take all of the like if you're blogging, it's a good way to sort of get that out there to a much broader audience faster. Facebook for us hasn't really been effective, we've found. You know, our audience is recruiters, so LinkedIn is obviously a good channel for us, and other sort of recruiting platforms that people spend all day in. But Facebook can be really effective. I know, you know, companies like HubSpot and Marketo have had a lot of success on Facebook. It really depends on what your audience, like where they spend their time, right? So for us, we actually decided to use Facebook more as a recruiting channel to get candidates versus using it for a lead acquisition channel.
I see. So what kind of LinkedIn advertising do you do? Do you do sponsored updates? Do you do in-mail? What exactly is working for you?
We do a lot of sponsored updates. So, and we'll target those, you know, based on the content. So we might have like 3 or 4 different ones targeting different audiences. So maybe one is about KPIs, and we have that targeting, you know, heads of talent or founders or hiring managers at senior levels. And then maybe we have some very hands-on practical like sourcing strategies, and then we just target sourcers with those. So that's been really good for us.
So do you usually do content sponsor updates, or is it like downloads, ebooks, or best practices?
What we do actually is we'll sponsor content from our blog, and then at the bottom of every blog post, we have a call to action for some relevant download. So it's either a buyer's guide, depending on the type of content in the blog post, or maybe it's a scorecard template or a referral template. Depending on what the content is, we'll always have a call to action. So it's like, it's not so pushy, I guess. It's like, it's more like, hey, we want to engage you in conversation. Like, exactly.
So do you also do only company page sponsored updates, or do you do personal profile sponsored updates as well? What has worked for you?
We've done mostly company page. And actually, we just started doing in-mail So I'll have to come back to you with how those are performing.
Okay, cool, cool. All right, that's all for today, Barbara. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you too. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure is all ours. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers for watching this episode of the Social CMO Show. I'm your host, the Social Data Girl, signing off. But until next time, keep thinking about social business nirvana. Take care.